Welcome, dear traveller, to Medieval Screen Finds, a quiet corner of the internet where we explore history, a chill space where the echoes of the past gently guide you toward a restful calm. Tonight, as the world outside settles into its gentle slumber, we journey back in time, far from the bright lights and hurried pace of our modern lives. We will explore a history often left untold, a fundamental human experience veiled by the mists of time and the discomfort of its realities. This is a story of beginnings, of life emerging into a world vastly different from our own. It is a story of vulnerability, of hope, and of the profound strength of those who walked before us. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to Medieval Screen Finds to get more boring sleep videos, but only if these videos truly brings you rest. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's comforting seeing all the places where these calm historical stories reach. Imagine, if you will, the gentle flow of seasons in a medieval village. The rhythmic turning of the agricultural year, the subtle shifts in light and temperature that dictated daily life. Within this cyclical existence, the human body too followed its own ancient rhythms. Conception, the very spark of new life, was understood not through the lens of modern biology, but through a tapestry of faith, superstition, and an intuitive understanding of the natural world. In this era, the journey of pregnancy was less a medical process to be managed, and more a profound unfolding of divine will. It was believed, with deep conviction, that God's hand guided the very moment of creation. A new life was seen as a blessing, a gift from the heavens, or at times a trial sent by providence. There was little to no understanding of the intricate biological dance of hormones, cellular division, or genetic inheritance that we now take for granted. The inner workings of the human body, especially concerning reproduction, remained a profound mystery, often attributed to unseen forces, to the alignment of stars, or to the direct intervention of the divine. Consider a young woman, perhaps just a few years beyond childhood herself, now with a subtly changing body. She would, in time, recognize the familiar signs, the missed cycles, the subtle shifts in her appetite, the growing fatigue. But unlike today, there would be no immediate confirmation from a small, discreet test kit, no quick visit to a clinic for a blood draw. Her knowledge would come from observation, from the whispered wisdom of older women, from the shared experiences of her community. And as her pregnancy progressed, the profound lack of antenatal care would become strikingly apparent. The concept of regular checkups with a physician, of monitoring blood pressure, of measuring fetal growth simply did not exist. There were no dietary guidelines, no recommendations for specific vitamins or supplements, no discussions about exercise tailored for pregnancy. Her diet would be the same as her family's, often dictated by the seasons and the meager harvests, sometimes consisting of coarse bread, watery gruel, and what little meat or vegetables could be procured. The idea of a balanced nutritional intake for the optimal development of the child was utterly unknown. Any discomforts, from morning sickness to swelling limbs, were simply endured as part of the natural, if often challenging, course of carrying a child. There was no medical professional to alleviate her symptoms, no one to reassure her that what she was experiencing was normal, or, conversely, to identify potential complications early on. The journey was solitary in its medical aspect, though surrounded by the close-knit fabric of the community. Within this vacuum of scientific understanding, superstition and folk remedies flourished, offering both comfort and, at times, unintended harm. Imagine a small leather pouch worn around the neck or tied to the wrist of a pregnant woman. Inside, perhaps a dried herb, a small stone with an unusual marking, or a piece of parchment inscribed with a prayer or a blessing. These charms and amulets were not mere trinkets. They were tangible expressions of hope, believed to ward off evil spirits, to protect against miscarriage, or to ensure a safe delivery. Herbal concoctions, passed down through generations, were often consumed, sometimes as tonics to strengthen the body, sometimes as remedies for specific ailments. Some might have had mild beneficial properties derived from the natural world, while others might have been inert, or, in some unfortunate cases, actively detrimental. The knowledge of these remedies was a closely guarded tradition, often held by the village wise woman or midwife, whose understanding was based on generations of anecdotal evidence rather than systematic study. She might advise a pregnant woman to avoid certain foods, to carry a specific type of knot, or to visit a holy shrine. These practices, while lacking in scientific basis, provided a sense of agency and control in a situation where genuine medical intervention was absent. They were woven into the daily fabric of life, offering a psychological shield against the pervasive anxieties of the unknown. For women of all social strata, but perhaps most acutely for those in positions of power, there was an immense societal pressure to produce heirs. In a world where lineage was paramount, where land, titles, and power passed from father to son, the birth of a male child was not just a joyous family event. It was a political and economic imperative. Imagine the weight of this expectation on a noblewoman, newly married, perhaps still a teenager, whose primary purpose in the eyes of her husband's family, and indeed the wider society, was to secure the future of the dynasty. Each passing month of pregnancy would be met with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The birth of a daughter, while loved, would often be followed by renewed pressure to conceive again, to try once more for the much-desired son. For peasant women, the pressure was different, but no less profound. Children were extra hands for labor, ensuring the survival of the family unit, helping in the fields, tending to livestock, contributing to the household economy. A large, healthy family was a sign of prosperity, of God's favor. The ability to bear children, and particularly healthy sons, was inextricably linked to a woman's social standing and her sense of worth within the community. This deep-seated societal expectation added a layer of psychological burden to the already considerable physical challenges of pregnancy, a constant, unspoken weight that accompanied every ache and discomfort. And so, the 9 months unfolded as an unknown journey. Each day was a step further into uncharted territory, filled with a pervasive sense of uncertainty and apprehension. There were no ultrasounds to offer glimpses of the developing child, no fetal heart monitors to reassure anxious parents. The movements within, the subtle kicks and flutters, were the only tangible proof of life, and each day without complication was a quiet blessing. The pregnant individual lived with the constant, unspoken knowledge of the dangers that lay ahead. Miscarriage was common, often unexplained, and deeply mourned. Stillbirths were a tragic reality, a profound sorrow endured in silence or with quiet communal grief. The journey was not one of routine medical appointments and reassuring statistics, but rather one of profound faith, stoic endurance, and an almost resigned acceptance of fate. The whispers of fear would mingle with prayers of hope. The body, swelling and changing, was a vessel for new life, but also a fragile container, susceptible to unseen dangers. There was no escaping the ever-present awareness that this journey, while miraculous, carried with it an inherent profound risk, a quiet understanding that the ultimate outcome remained firmly in the hands of destiny. The very air around a pregnant woman seemed to carry this subtle tension, this awareness of the delicate balance between life and oblivion. As the final weeks of pregnancy drew to a close and the subtle signs of impending labor began to manifest, the focus of the medieval woman's world would narrow considerably. Her attention, and that of her household, would turn inward, towards the most intimate and intensely anticipated event of her life. Unlike the clinical, often sterile environments of modern hospitals, childbirth in the Middle Ages was, almost without exception, an intensely personal and profoundly communal affair, occurring within the familiar confines of a familiar space. The birthing room was overwhelmingly the birthing person's own home. Imagine, if you will, a modest dwelling, perhaps a cottage with thick stone walls and a thatched roof, or a more elaborate chamber within a manor house or castle. Regardless of social standing, the scene was one of intimate familiarity. The room chosen would likely be one that could be made warm, often with a hearth glowing softly, casting flickering shadows upon the walls. It might be the main living space, or a dedicated bedroom. The air would likely be thick with the scent of wood smoke, perhaps mingled with the earthy aroma of rushes scattered on the floor, and the faint, sweet scent of herbs that might have been strewn about for purification or comfort. The light would be dim, softened by small, unshuttered windows, or by the gentle glow of tallow candles as dusk deepened. There would be no harsh electric lights, no constant beeping of machinery. Only the soft murmurs of voices, the crackle of the fire, and the rhythmic sound of breathing. The bed, if one was used for part of the labour, would be the family's own, worn smooth by years of use, perhaps covered with clean, though perhaps unbleached linens. Often, however, the birthing individual would not remain in bed, but rather find positions of greater comfort and utility, as we will discuss later. The very familiarity of the surroundings, the scent of her own home, the sight of her cherished belongings, would have offered a primal sense of security, a subtle comfort in the face of the overwhelming physical challenge ahead. This was not a place of medical intervention, but a space of endurance, support, and profound personal transition. The sounds of daily life outside, the distant lowing of cattle, the chatter of neighbours, the call of a bird, would gently filter in, grounding the experience in the ongoing rhythm of the world, even as the birthing person's world contracted to the intense sensations within. At the heart of this intimate setting stood the crucial figure of the midwife, her presence fundamental to the entire process. The role of the midwife was central, yet her knowledge, while invaluable, was not acquired through formal schooling or rigorous scientific training as we understand it today. She was, in essence, an untrained practitioner, at least by modern standards. Typically, she was an experienced older woman from the local community, someone who had likely borne several children of her own and had attended countless births over many years. Her expertise was a living tradition, a continuous chain of knowledge passed down from one generation of midwives to the next, through observation, apprenticeship, and hands-on experience. She knew the rhythms of labour, the subtle signs of progress, and the more obvious indicators of distress, not from textbooks, but from the raw lived reality of countless deliveries. She understood the importance of patience, the necessity of encouraging the birthing person, and the critical moments when a gentle push or a careful manipulation might be required. Her tools were few and simple: her hands, her experience, and perhaps a small collection of salves or herbal infusions. She would arrive, often summoned in haste, and immediately become the calm anchor in the birthing chamber, her presence a source of reassurance. She knew the local families, their histories, their strengths, and their vulnerabilities. She was not merely a birth attendant, but often a confidant, a spiritual guide, and a source of practical wisdom. Her fees, if any, were often paid in kind: a share of the harvest, a length of cloth, a meal, a reflection of her integral role within the communal economy. The midwife embodied the accumulated wisdom of centuries, a quiet monument to resilience and practical knowledge, passed not through scholarly texts, but through the calloused hands and knowing eyes of women who had witnessed the profound mystery of birth time and again. Her limitations were the limitations of her era, a complete absence of germ theory, of surgical techniques, of advanced understanding of anatomy. Yet, within her world, she was indispensable, a beacon of guidance in the most vulnerable of moments. Beyond the midwife, the birthing chamber would be filled with the quiet, supportive presence of female companions. This was not a solitary ordeal, but a shared experience, a collective gathering of women offering comfort, prayer, and practical assistance. Imagine mothers, sisters, aunts, close friends, and trusted neighbours, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and hope. Their roles were varied. Some would hold the birthing person's hand, offering words of encouragement, wiping a feverish brow, or murmuring prayers. Others would be engaged in more practical tasks, fetching fresh water, warming cloths by the fire, preparing simple food for the weary attendants, or tending to the existing children in the household. Their presence created a circle of warmth and solidarity, a powerful female support network. In a world where women's lives were often circumscribed, the birthing chamber was a uniquely female domain, a space where bonds of sisterhood and community were forged and strengthened through shared vulnerability. Prayers would be a constant presence, sometimes whispered, sometimes chanted softly, a continuous plea to saints and to God for a safe delivery and a healthy child. Relics might be brought into the room, holy objects believed to possess protective powers. The atmosphere, though tense with anticipation, would also be imbued with a deep sense of shared humanity, a communal understanding of the profound challenge unfolding. There might be quiet conversations, murmurs of past births, shared anecdotes of courage and endurance. The support offered was not merely physical, it was deeply emotional and spiritual, acknowledging the perilous nature of the journey and the absolute necessity of collective hope. This web of female companionship was often the birthing person's most significant source of comfort and strength, a testament to the enduring power of community in times of profound need. One of the most striking differences between medieval and modern childbirth practices was the almost complete absence of male physicians. Imagine the social norms of the time. Strict modesty was paramount, especially concerning the female body. The idea of a man, even a highly educated physician, examining a birthing woman, particularly during the intimate and vulnerable stages of labour, was considered deeply scandalous, utterly taboo, and rarely, if ever, occurred. Male doctors, often trained in universities and relying on ancient Greek and Roman texts, primarily dealt with external ailments, fevers, or injuries that could be observed without violating these strict social strictures. Their knowledge of female anatomy and physiology, especially concerning reproduction, was often theoretical, derived from texts rather than practical experience, and heavily influenced by patriarchal assumptions. In the rare instances a male physician might be consulted for a complicated birth, it would typically be a last resort when the birthing person was already close to death and all other avenues had been exhausted. Even then, his involvement might be limited to distant observation or perhaps administering a potion rather than direct physical examination or intervention. The birthing chamber was a sacred space reserved for women. This social taboo, while reflecting the cultural norms of the era, undeniably limited the availability of what little advanced medical knowledge existed. Any specialized medical tools, however rudimentary, that a male physician might possess, were largely unavailable to the women who needed them most during childbirth. This strict segregation of medical practice by gender meant that birthing women were reliant almost entirely on the practical, traditional knowledge of midwives, rather than the more academic, albeit still limited, understanding of university-trained doctors. The midwife was the gatekeeper, the sole arbiter of care in these most private and vulnerable moments. Finally, consider the basic tools and hygiene available in the birthing chamber, or more accurately, the profound lack thereof. Imagine a time before the discovery of bacteria, before the understanding that invisible microbes could cause devastating infections. The concept of sterilization, of antiseptic practices, was utterly unknown. The midwife's hands, though experienced, would not have been scrubbed with soap and water, let alone sterilized, before assisting a birth. Any cloths used would have been simply laundered, not sanitized. The instruments, if any were employed, perhaps a blunt hook for managing the umbilical cord, or a sharp knife for cutting it, would have been simply wiped clean, if at all, certainly not boiled or disinfected. The air itself, thick with dust and the ordinary particulate matter of a pre-industrial home, carried unseen dangers. Water, often drawn from a well or river, would not have been purified. It might be used for washing, but its own microbial content would have been a hidden risk. The birthing person herself, in the throes of labor, would be perspiring, fluids would be present, and cleanliness would be difficult to maintain. This profound ignorance of hygiene, while utterly innocent, unknowingly amplified the risks of childbirth exponentially. Simple scratches, small tears, or the open wound of the umbilical cord could become entry points for deadly infections. The very efforts to assist, the touch of a hand, the use of a simple implement, could, with tragic irony, introduce the very pathogens that would claim lives. This lack of understanding about cleanliness was perhaps one of the most insidious and devastating factors contributing to the high rates of maternal and infant mortality. It was a silent, invisible enemy, present in every birthing chamber, rendering even the most well-intentioned care fraught with peril. The air might smell of herbs and wood smoke, but beneath it all, the unseen world of microbes waited, ready to unleash its devastating consequences. As the birthing person's body began its profound work, the quiet anticipation in the chamber would shift into an atmosphere of focused endurance. This was not a quick event, rarely a swift passage, but rather an experience that demanded immense fortitude and a deep well of patience from everyone present. For the medieval woman, labor was often a prolonged, physically exhausting ordeal. Imagine the sheer stamina required. Hours could stretch into an entire day, and sometimes, terrifyingly, even into 2 or 3 days. There was no modern medical intervention to speed the process, no intravenous drips to augment contractions, no surgical options to relieve prolonged distress. The body was left to its own, ancient rhythms, guided only by the slow, inexorable forces of nature. Each contraction would ebb and flow, a wave of intense sensation, demanding every ounce of strength and focus. The birthing person would navigate these waves, sometimes moaning softly, sometimes biting down on a piece of cloth or a leather strap to manage the pain. Her muscles would ache, her limbs would tremble, and profound fatigue would begin to set in. The midwife and female companions would offer cool compresses, perhaps sips of water or herbal teas, and constant words of encouragement, urging her to find her inner resilience. They understood that this was a test of the body's limits, a marathon of the spirit. The air in the room would grow heavy with the exertion, the scent of sweat and effort mingled with the quiet prayers. The hands holding hers would grow damp, their grip unwavering. The sound of her strained breathing would fill the space, a testament to the monumental task underway. There was no escaping the physical demands. They were a relentless, undeniable reality, requiring an almost heroic level of perseverance from the individual bringing new life into the world. The passage of time itself seemed to stretch and distort, each minute an eternity, each hour a monumental achievement. In contrast to the widespread modern practice of lying flat on one's back for childbirth, Medieval birthing individuals often adopted upright positions during labor and delivery. Imagine a sturdy wooden stool, often with a U-shaped opening in the front, allowing the birthing person to sit upright. This birthing stool, sometimes intricately carved, sometimes a simple piece of furniture, was a common fixture in many households. It allowed gravity to assist the descent of the baby, a natural advantage that is often lost when lying supine. Alternatively, a woman might kneel on the floor, perhaps with cushions or a blanket beneath her knees, leaning forward onto a bench or the laps of supportive women. She might stand, swaying or leaning against a wall, or even be supported in a semi-sitting position by strong arms behind her. These positions were not arbitrary. They were born of centuries of practical observation. Midwives understood, intuitively, that an upright posture could facilitate the opening of the pelvis and aid the baby's passage through the birth canal. It allowed for greater mobility, enabling the birthing person to shift and adjust to find what little comfort was available. Imagine the slight sway of her body, the gentle rocking motion as she instinctively moved to ease the pressure and aid the natural process. The images we often see of medieval women giving birth flat in a bed are largely inaccurate, a reflection more of artistic convention than historical reality. The reality was more dynamic, more attuned to the body's natural inclinations, even if the underlying physiological reasons were not fully understood. The preference for these active, upright positions highlights a practical wisdom that, in some ways, aligns with contemporary birthing philosophies, recognizing the benefits of movement and gravity in supporting a natural delivery. Perhaps one of the most stark realities of medieval childbirth, a reality that we in the modern era can scarcely comprehend, was the complete and utter lack of pain relief. Imagine enduring hours or even days of intense, relentless contractions with no effective medication, no epidural, no nitrous oxide, not even a simple over-the-counter painkiller. The birthing person's journey through labor was, in essence, a pure test of her body's capacity to withstand profound physical agony. There were no anesthetic agents, no understanding of how to safely numb or alleviate the sensation of pain. Any pain management was purely psychological or reliant on rudimentary herbal infusions. Perhaps a midwife might offer a cup of a weak herbal tea, made from something like chamomile or poppy, hoping for a mild sedative effect, but the impact on severe labor pain would have been negligible at best. More often, the pain relief came in the form of desperate prayers, whispered incantations, or the sheer force of will. The birthing person might bite down on a piece of leather, tear at linens, or grip the hands of her attendants with bone-crushing force. Her cries, her moans, her strained breathing would fill the room, a raw expression of her suffering. The women around her could offer empathy, compassion, and physical support, but they were utterly powerless to diminish the agony. This was a pain that had to be endured, a passage through fire. The psychological toll of such unrelenting pain, added to the physical exhaustion, must have been immense. It speaks to an almost incomprehensible level of human resilience, a stoic acceptance of suffering as an unavoidable part of the process of bringing forth new life. The quiet courage of these women, facing such a monumental challenge without the solace of pain relief, stands as a profound testament to their strength. In addition to offering encouragement and spiritual support, the midwife's role also involved direct, manual assistance and manipulations to aid the birth. Imagine her experienced hands, guided by instinct and generations of passed down knowledge, gently feeling the contours of the birthing person's abdomen, assessing the baby's position, or attempting to guide its descent. These were often external manipulations, gentle pressures applied to the belly, or guiding the birthing person into a specific posture. In some cases, if the baby seemed to be presenting awkwardly, the midwife might attempt internal manipulations. using her hands to gently reposition the baby within the birth canal. This was a delicate and highly skilled art, born of repeated exposure to countless births. Sometimes, these interventions were remarkably effective. A well-timed repositioning could free a stuck shoulder, or encourage a baby to turn slightly, facilitating a smoother passage. The midwife's hands were her most vital tools, providing a physical link between the knowledge of the past and the immediate, unfolding reality of the present birth. However, without the benefit of modern anatomical understanding or sterile techniques, even well-intentioned manipulations carried inherent risks. Unseen infections could be introduced. Too much force or an incorrect assessment of the situation could cause injury to both the birthing person and the baby. There were no forceps, no vacuum extractors, no instruments to aid in a difficult delivery. The midwife relied solely on her sense of touch, her intuition, and her understanding of natural processes. The successful outcome of a birth often hinged on her skill and judgment in these critical moments, a silent dance between the birthing body and the guiding hands of its most experienced attendant. And so, the birthing chamber would settle into a tense waiting game. The hours would stretch, sometimes into days, marked by the rhythmic intensity of contractions and the quiet, anxious prayers of those gathered. Imagine the atmosphere in the room: hushed whispers, the soft glow of the fire or a lamp, the rhythmic sound of the birthing person's breathing, punctuated by moments of straining and cries of effort. Every person in the room would be acutely aware of the preciousness of the life being brought forth and the profound risks involved. The midwife would remain vigilant, her eyes constantly on the birthing person, observing every subtle change, listening to every sound, her hand often resting gently on the abdomen, feeling for signs of progress or distress. The female companions would also play their part in this waiting game. They might tell stories in hushed tones to distract the birthing person, or offer words of encouragement drawn from their own experiences. Food and drink might be prepared for the exhausted attendants, simple broths or bread, eaten quietly so as not to disturb the profound focus of the room. There was an unspoken understanding that time was both an ally and an enemy. With each passing hour, the birthing person grew more exhausted, the risks of complications increased, and the collective anxiety mounted. Yet there was also the understanding that the body had its own timetable, and patience was paramount. This waiting game was a test of endurance not just for the birthing person, but for everyone involved, a shared vigil of hope against the ever-present shadow of uncertainty. The world outside the chamber would continue its course, but within these walls, time seemed to slow, distorted by the primal ancient process unfolding. As the long hours of labor progressed, and the moment of birth approached, the focus in the chamber intensified. While the arrival of new life was the ultimate goal, the profound dangers to the birthing person herself were a constant, unspoken shadow, a grim reality that made every successful birth a testament to survival. Of all the immediate risks, postpartum hemorrhage was perhaps the most terrifying and swift. Imagine, if you will, the body's incredible effort culminating in the birth of the child. Then, instead of the contractions gradually subsiding and the uterus gently contracting to expel the placenta, the bleeding simply continued, unrelenting, gushing forth, often in alarming quantities. There was no modern understanding of uterine atony, no medications like oxytocin to encourage the uterus to clamp down and close off the myriad blood vessels that had supplied the placenta. The midwife might attempt rudimentary external massage of the abdomen, hoping to stimulate contractions, or perhaps apply cold compresses. But these efforts were often futile against a severe hemorrhage. The birthing person, already profoundly exhausted from the immense physical exertion of labor, would quickly grow pale, her breathing becoming shallow, her pulse weakening. The sight of so much blood pooling on the straw-covered floor or saturating the linens would send waves of silent alarm through the attendants. There was a horrifying helplessness in the face of such a rapid decline. Lives could be lost in mere minutes or an hour, the sudden rush of life draining away before anyone could fully comprehend what was happening. It was a brutal and common cause of maternal death, leaving families shattered and newborns motherless. The raw, visceral reality of bleeding out, often quietly and quickly, stands as one of the most tragic and prevalent perils faced by medieval birthing individuals. It was a silent, unyielding thief of life, stealing away the triumph of birth with horrifying efficiency, a stark reminder of the body's fragility when its internal mechanisms faltered without aid. Beyond the immediate crisis of hemorrhage, a more insidious and equally devastating threat loomed in the days and weeks following delivery: puerperal fever, often known as childbed fever. Imagine the birthing chamber, filled with the warmth of the hearth, the scent of fresh straw, and the collective efforts of the attendants. Now, picture microscopic organisms, utterly invisible to the medieval eye, carried on unwashed hands, on unsterilized cloths, or perhaps even in the very air. These bacteria would find entry points in the inevitable small tears or abrasions within the birth canal, or through the exposed site where the umbilical cord had been cut. Within a day or two, or sometimes a week after birth, the birthing person would develop a fever, often starting subtly, then rapidly escalating. Chills would rack her body, her head would ache, and her abdomen would become tender and swollen. The fever would climb, her skin burning to the touch, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. This was not just any fever. This was a systemic infection, spreading through the bloodstream, leading quickly to sepsis. Without antibiotics, without any understanding of the cause, there was virtually no effective treatment. The midwife and family members might try ancient remedies, cooling poultices, herbal teas, or prayers, but these were powerless against the onslaught of bacterial infection. The birthing person would grow weaker and weaker, delirium might set in, and eventually, her body would succumb. The mortality rate from puerperal fever was extraordinarily high, often reaching 100% in severe cases. It transformed the period of postpartum recovery, which should have been a time of gentle healing and bonding with the newborn, into a terrifying, often fatal, descent into illness. This silent killer, stemming directly from the lack of hygienic practices, rendered the very act of assistance potentially deadly, making it one of the gravest and most widespread threats to maternal survival in the medieval era. It was a hidden horror, a consequence of ignorance about a microbial world yet to be discovered. For some unfortunate women, the journey of labor would simply grind to a halt, leading to the deadly complication of obstructed labor. Imagine the body working relentlessly, contractions powerful and persistent, yet the baby simply could not pass through the birth canal. This could be due to a disproportionately large baby, a baby in an abnormal position that could not be corrected, or a pelvis that was too small or unusually shaped. In the modern world, such a scenario would swiftly lead to a caesarean section, a surgical intervention to save both lives. In the Middle Ages, however, no such surgical options existed that could safely deliver a living child from an obstructed labor. The understanding of sterile surgery was non-existent, and the ability to perform a caesarean section on a living woman with any hope of maternal survival was utterly beyond the scope of medieval medical practice. The birthing person would endure agonizing hours, sometimes days, of unproductive labor. Her strength would drain away, her pain would become unbearable, and eventually, exhaustion and rupture of the uterus or overwhelming infection from the prolonged process would claim her life. In desperate, last resort situations, if the birthing person had already died, a post-mortem caesarean might be attempted to save the baby, though the infant's chances of survival were also grim. But for a living woman in obstructed labour, her fate was almost certainly death, a slow and agonising demise as her body failed in its monumental task. This situation epitomised the brutal limitations of medieval childbirth, a tragic impasse where medical knowledge was powerless against a fundamental biological barrier, leading inevitably to the loss of both lives. The sounds in the chamber would shift from cries of pain to whispers of despair as the grim reality of an impossible birth settled over everyone present. The intense physical pressures of childbirth often led to significant physical trauma, resulting in tears and injuries that, in the absence of modern medical care, caused immense suffering and long-term disability. Imagine the extraordinary force exerted on the perineum, the area between the vagina and the anus, as the baby descended. Small tears were almost inevitable, but severe tears extending into the rectal area were shockingly common. These injuries, often described as third or fourth degree tears today, would have been agonizing. There was no knowledge of sterile suturing, no skilled surgical repair to mend the damaged tissues. The midwife might attempt to press the tissues together, perhaps apply an herbal poultice, but effective repair was beyond her capabilities. These severe tears often went untreated or healed poorly, if at all. The consequences were profound and lifelong. Imagine living with chronic pain, with incontinence of urine or feces, a constant, humiliating and debilitating reality. Such injuries could make daily life profoundly difficult, impacting mobility, hygiene, and social interactions. Beyond the perineum, other internal injuries, such as uterine tears or prolapse of organs due to weakened pelvic floor muscles, were also possible, leading to chronic discomfort and further health complications. These hidden injuries, often unseen by others, were a silent burden carried by countless medieval women, a constant reminder of the immense physical cost of bringing life into the world. They were not merely inconveniences, but life-altering conditions that diminished the quality of existence for years, a testament to the brutal physical toll extracted by childbirth in an era devoid of surgical repair. Finally, the birthing person's chances of survival were significantly compounded by their overall health status, particularly if they were already weakened by malnutrition and exhaustion. Imagine a woman, perhaps from a peasant family, who has spent her life engaged in relentless physical labor in the fields, often with an inadequate and inconsistent diet. Her body, even before pregnancy, might have been deficient in vital nutrients, her immune system compromised. Now, add the immense nutritional demands of carrying a developing fetus for 9 months, often without any increase in food intake, or even with reduced intake during periods of famine or hardship. By the time labor began, she might already be profoundly anemic, her energy reserves depleted, her muscles already taxed. The prolonged, exhausting ordeal of labor, stretching over many hours or days, would push her already weakened body to its absolute limits. She would have little strength left to push, to endure the pain, or to recover from the inevitable blood loss. Her body would simply lack the reserves needed to fight off infection, to heal effectively, or to sustain itself through the postpartum period. This underlying vulnerability, a silent consequence of medieval life, meant that complications that a healthier individual might have weathered could prove fatal for a woman already on the brink of collapse. It created a vicious cycle. Poor nutrition led to weakened bodies, which in turn made childbirth an even more perilous journey, contributing significantly to the heartbreakingly high maternal mortality rates. The struggle for daily sustenance thus became intrinsically linked to the struggle for survival in the birthing chamber. a grim intertwining of the challenges of life and the perils of giving it. After the arduous and perilous journey of labour, when the birthing person's immense struggle finally culminated in the arrival of a new life, the anxieties did not simply dissipate. Indeed, a different, equally profound set of dangers immediately presented themselves, shifting focus to the extraordinarily vulnerable newborn. For every successful birth, there was the tragic and heartbreaking reality of stillbirth and neonatal death. Imagine the hush that would fall over the birthing chamber if, after all the effort, all the pain, and all the fervent prayers, the baby emerged silent and unresponsive. A stillbirth was a profound and devastating sorrow, a life that had flickered into being within the womb but had, for unseen reasons, failed to take its first breath. There would be no frantic medical interventions to resuscitate, no advanced neonatal care to attempt to coax life into a non-breathing infant. The midwife would simply wrap the tiny, lifeless body, and the silence in the room would be heavy with collective grief. Even if the baby did cry, signaling its arrival into the world, the first days and weeks of life were fraught with peril. Neonatal death, the passing of an infant within the first 28 days of life, was tragically common. A baby might seem healthy at birth, only to weaken rapidly, perhaps succumbing to an unseen infection, a congenital anomaly, or simply the overwhelming fragility of its new existence. The parents would hover, their hearts filled with a desperate hope, watching for any sign of distress. But without understanding the underlying causes, without incubators, without specialized feeds or medications, their ability to intervene was heartbreakingly limited. These early losses were woven into the fabric of medieval life, a pervasive sorrow that touched nearly every family, making the survival of an infant beyond its first month a cause for quiet celebration and immense gratitude. Each tiny coffin, each small grave, bore silent witness to the profound vulnerability of new life in a world so lacking in medical safeguards. The brief flicker of hope, so quickly extinguished, left a void that was both personal and universally understood within the community. The very process of childbirth, particularly a long or difficult one, could inflict significant harm on the infant, leading to various birth injuries. Imagine a baby compressed and pushed through a narrow birth canal for hours. The forces at play were immense, and without the delicate, precise interventions of modern obstetrics, these forces could cause profound trauma. A baby's delicate skull, not yet fully fused, could be subjected to severe pressure, leading to contusions or even intracranial hemorrhage, bleeding within the brain, which would likely be fatal or cause severe, lasting neurological damage. Bones could be fractured, especially collarbones or arm bones, as the baby twisted and turned in its descent. While some fractures might heal naturally over time, others could lead to permanent deformities or disabilities. Nerve damage was also a real risk. Imagine the pulling or stretching of the baby's neck and shoulders during delivery, which could injure the brachial plexus, a network of nerves that controls movement and sensation in the arm and hand. This could result in a condition similar to Erb's palsy, causing weakness or paralysis in the affected limb. Such injuries, whether visible or internal, would often go unrecognized or untreated, leaving the child with lifelong impairments, a limp, a weakened arm, a cognitive delay. These were silent testimonies to a difficult birth, endured without the benefit of expert medical diagnosis or therapeutic intervention. The very act of being born, a miracle in itself, carried with it the potential for lasting physical wounds, impacting the child's quality of life from its very first moments. Furthermore, the same pervasive lack of hygiene that threatened the birthing person also posed an immediate and deadly danger to the newborn leading to severe infections for the baby. Imagine the midwife's unwashed hands, or the unsterilized knife used to cut the umbilical cord. The stump of the umbilical cord, a direct pathway into the baby's tiny body, was particularly vulnerable. Bacteria, unseen and unknown, could easily enter this open wound, leading to a devastating infection known as omphalitis, which could quickly spread throughout the infant's bloodstream, causing sepsis and death. The baby's delicate eyes, exposed to vaginal fluids during birth, could also become infected, leading to conditions like ophthalmia neonatorum, which, if untreated, could cause blindness. Imagine a newborn, seemingly healthy one day, suddenly becoming lethargic, refusing to feed, developing a fever, or exhibiting a strange rash. These subtle signs of infection would be deeply alarming to the parents, but their understanding of disease causation was limited. They might try traditional remedies or seek prayers, but without antibiotics or even basic antiseptic care, the infection would often rage unchecked. The infant's nascent immune system, still developing, was ill-equipped to fight off such aggressive pathogens. A simple bacterial exposure, easily treatable today, could become a swift and lethal assault on the fragile newborn. This silent, microbial threat, invisible to the medieval eye, was a pervasive and merciless killer of infants, transforming the quiet joy of birth into profound grief with terrifying speed and regularity. The pervasive presence of unseen dangers made every breath the infant took, in its first days, a precarious struggle against a silent adversary. Beyond immediate injuries and infections, the simple realities of medieval life meant that premature birth and low birth weight were almost certain death sentences for infants. Imagine a tiny baby, born weeks or even months before its due time. Its lungs might not be fully developed, its body temperature difficult to regulate, its feeding reflexes weak. In our modern world, premature babies are whisked into specialized neonatal intensive care units, placed in incubators that mimic the womb, given precise nutrition, and supported by a vast array of medical technology. In the Middle Ages, none of this existed. There were no incubators to provide warmth, no feeding tubes for infants too weak to suckle, no ventilators to aid underdeveloped lungs. A premature or very low birth weight baby would struggle to maintain its body temperature in a cold room, despite being swaddled tightly and placed near the fire. Its tiny body would quickly lose heat, leading to hypothermia. Its immature digestive system would struggle to process nourishment, leading to dehydration and starvation. Even if able to suckle, its weakness might prevent it from getting enough milk. The odds were overwhelmingly stacked against such a fragile life. The midwife and family could only offer what comfort they could, wrapping the baby, holding it close, and praying for a miracle. But more often than not, the miracle did not come. These extremely vulnerable infants, lacking the physiological maturity to thrive independently, simply faded away, silent casualties of a world unprepared to support their fragile beginnings. Their passing was often a quiet, poignant acknowledgement of nature's harsh selectivity, a testament to the fact that not all life, however cherished, was destined to survive its earliest moments. Finally, the general exposure and neglect faced by newborns in a world with limited infant care knowledge contributed significantly to their early demise. Imagine the infant's early environment, perhaps a drafty cottage, lacking consistent warmth. In winter, the cold could be brutal, and even well-meaning efforts to keep the baby warm might be insufficient. Swaddling, while intended to comfort and protect if too tight, could restrict breathing or circulation. The understanding of proper feeding was also rudimentary. While breastfeeding was the norm, if the birthing person was ill, weakened, or if the milk supply was insufficient, there were no safe alternatives like formula. Wet nursing was an option for the wealthy, but for most, a failing milk supply meant a rapid decline for the infant. Furthermore, subtle complications that we now recognize as urgent medical issues often went unnoticed or misinterpreted. A baby might suffer from jaundice, dehydration, or an internal congenital defect, but without the knowledge to recognize these symptoms, they would simply be seen as a baby failing to thrive or taken by God's will. There was no routine weighing to track growth, no precise measurement of intake, no understanding of developmental milestones. The sheer vulnerability of newborns to their environment, to inadequate feeding, to undetected illness, and to the general limitations of care made their first months a terrifying gauntlet. Every cough, every cry, every moment of unusual stillness would have been a source of deep anxiety. The odds were simply stacked against the very youngest, turning the initial days of life into a period of extreme precariousness, where countless tiny lives were extinguished before they had truly begun to blossom. After the tumultuous and profoundly challenging experience of childbirth, the birthing person's journey was far from over. A critical period of rest and recovery followed, a time traditionally known as the period of confinement. Imagine a woman having just endured hours or even days of intense labor, her body profoundly exhausted and her spirit perhaps both relieved and utterly drained. For several weeks, sometimes up to 40 days, she would be expected to remain largely indoors, resting and recovering from the monumental physical ordeal she had undergone. This was not a luxury for most. It was a deeply ingrained custom, understood as a fundamental necessity for healing. The community, and particularly the female members of her household, would step in to manage the daily chores, prepare simple, nourishing meals, and care for the older children. The new mother's primary responsibility was to regain her strength and, if she was able, to nurture her newborn. During this time, her body would slowly begin the process of returning to its pre-pregnancy state, a process that was often fraught with challenges. The internal tears and injuries, if not immediately fatal, would begin to heal, though often imperfectly. The uterus would slowly contract, a process sometimes accompanied by persistent dull aches. Her milk would come in, bringing with it both the blessing of nourishment for her infant and sometimes the discomfort of engorgement or the challenge of a difficult latch. The period of confinement was a delicate balance between recovery and the demanding, relentless work of early motherhood. There were no modern pain medications to ease her discomfort, no skilled physical therapists to guide her recovery. She relied on the wisdom of her midwife and the support of her female relatives to guide her through this vulnerable time. This enforced period of rest, while essential, also underscored the fragility of her condition and the profound impact that childbirth had on the female body in a world without modern medical intervention. It was a time of quiet recuperation, but also of vigilance, as the lingering dangers of infection or hemorrhage could still manifest themselves. Despite the period of confinement and the best efforts of midwives and family, the stark reality of medieval life meant that maternal mortality was tragically high. Imagine the profound sorrow that permeated communities when a woman, having successfully brought a new life into the world, succumbed to the very act of creation. Childbirth was, without question, one of the leading causes of death for women of reproductive age in the Middle Ages. More women died in their prime due to complications of pregnancy and birth than from warfare, famine, or even many of the endemic diseases of the time. The risks we have discussed, hemorrhage, puerperal fever, obstructed labor, severe injuries, were not rare occurrences. They were constant, looming threats that cut short countless lives. Each time a woman entered labor, her family and community knew, with a deep and unspoken dread, that she might not emerge alive. Her survival was often considered a miracle, a testament to divine mercy. The loss of a mother was devastating to a family. Children left motherless, husbands left to grieve, and shoulder the immense burden of raising a family alone in a harsh world. This high mortality rate shaped medieval society in fundamental ways, influencing family structures, inheritance patterns, and even social customs. It underscored the inherent danger of womanhood itself in that era, making the act of bringing forth life an act of profound courage, always shadowed by the very real possibility of one's own demise. The quiet graves in the churchyard, often bearing the names of young women, told a silent, somber story of the cost of medieval beginnings. Hand in hand with high maternal mortality rates was the equally heartbreaking reality of infant mortality rates, which were, by modern standards, catastrophically high. Quietly reflect, if you will, on the statistics. It is estimated that anywhere from 20% to 50% of children born in the Middle Ages did not survive beyond their first year of life. A significant portion of these deaths occurred in the first few days or weeks, as we discussed, due to birth injuries, infections, or prematurity. But even beyond that immediate neonatal period, threats like disease, malnutrition, and accidents continued to claim young lives throughout infancy and early childhood. Imagine a family, year after year, experiencing the profound joy of a new birth, only to endure the crushing sorrow of loss, sometimes repeatedly. Large families were not merely a social preference, they were a demographic necessity, a strategy for survival in a world where so many children simply did not live long enough to reach adulthood. The cribs stood empty, the tiny clothes remained unworn, and the hopes vested in a new life were often tragically dashed. This pervasive reality of infant death fostered a complex relationship with childhood. While deeply loved and cherished, children were also seen as profoundly vulnerable, their survival always tenuous. Parents learned to hold their hopes with a certain quiet resignation, understanding that life was fleeting and fragile. The constant cycle of birth and death, joy and grief, shaped the emotional landscape of medieval families, making the simple act of a child reaching its first birthday a profound milestone worthy of celebration and immense relief. The quiet passing of countless infants, a silent statistic in the grand sweep of history, reminds us of the profound challenges faced by the most vulnerable among them. Given the immense dangers to both mother and child, and the omnipresent threat of early death, the rituals surrounding new life were imbued with deep spiritual significance. For the newborn, baptism was of paramount importance and was often performed with extreme urgency. Imagine a tiny, fragile infant, perhaps barely clinging to life. The first priority, even above immediate physical comfort, was often to ensure its soul was saved. Baptism was believed to cleanse original sin and secure the child's place in heaven if it were to die. Midwives were often empowered to perform emergency baptisms if the child's life was clearly in danger and a priest was not immediately available. The water poured over the infant's head, the whispered words of faith. These were desperate acts of love and hope, a spiritual lifeline thrown to a life teetering on the brink. For those who did not survive, whether mother or child, last rites and spiritual comfort played a crucial role in processing profound loss. The community would gather, offering prayers for the departed soul, providing solace to the grieving family. Funerals, though simple, would be solemn affairs, acknowledging the brevity of life and the inevitability of death. The Church provided a framework for understanding and enduring such tragedies, offering the promise of eternal life and reunion in the afterlife. In a world where medical understanding was so limited, faith often served as the primary source of solace and meaning in the face of uncontrollable suffering and loss. The spiritual rituals were not just formalities, they were deeply felt expressions of hope, grief, and the profound human need to make sense of life's most unbearable passages. As our quiet journey through the hidden realities of medieval childbirth draws to a close, let us reflect on the profound, enduring strength of those who lived in this distant past. Imagine the quiet courage of medieval birthing individuals. They faced an ordeal of immense physical pain and profound danger without the comfort of modern medicine, often with only the practical wisdom of their female kin and the power of their faith. Their resilience was not celebrated with fanfare, but lived in the quiet, stoic endurance of each contraction, each struggle, each moment of uncertainty. Their stories, largely untold in formal histories, are nonetheless woven into the very fabric of our existence. For every one of us is descended from ancestors who navigated this perilous passage. Their lives were a testament to human fortitude, a quiet heroism found in the most intimate and vulnerable of moments. The mothers who survived, carrying the scars both visible and unseen, and the children who beat the odds, growing into adulthood, represent an unbreakable chain of life that extends directly to us. We, in our comfortable, medically advanced present, can only gaze back with a quiet appreciation for the sheer tenacity required to simply exist, to reproduce, to continue the human story under such formidable conditions. The quiet, untold stories carried by every family, whispers of survival against overwhelming odds, resonate through the centuries. They remind us of the profound journey that precedes every life, and the enduring strength of those who, against all perils, brought forth the generations that led to us. And now, as the gentle whispers of the past begin to recede, we draw our quiet journey to a close. We have traversed the hidden landscapes of medieval childbirth, a world where the beginnings of life were inextricably linked with profound risk, unwavering faith, and the quiet, extraordinary strength of individuals. Allow the images of the familiar birthing chamber, the patient midwife, and the enduring spirit of the birthing person to gently fade. Consider for a moment the immense contrast with our own time, the advancements in medicine, the availability of comfort, the safety nets that we now, perhaps, take for granted. This quiet reflection is not meant to alarm, but to foster a deeper appreciation for the journey of humanity, for the triumphs over adversity, and for the simple, profound comfort of our present peace. As the echoes of medieval life settle into silence, allow your own breath to deepen, your muscles to relax. The world outside is quiet now. The stories of the past, with their inherent challenges, have offered their gentle insights. There is nothing more to do, nowhere else to be, but here, in this moment of stillness. Let the final threads of history unravel, leaving you with a sense of peace and a quiet understanding. Drift now, if you wish, into the soft embrace of sleep. The journey is complete. Rest deeply,